The European Commission, for those of you who don't know, consists of 27 men, one from each member state of the Brussels EU. But none of them are elected. We, the people, have no means of voting them into office or out of office. The system of EU directives is also described in Salter's book. We touched upon a couple of those a few moments ago. But perhaps most significantly of all, the finalization of what was called the Master Agreement, which was governed details of any ongoing changes or supplementary legal agreements. Because almost 60 years later, this Master Agreement took form and shape in what we now call the Lisbon Treaty. We'll come to the Lisbon Treaty in a few moments, but there is further proof of the Nazis' intended war aims that emerged during the Nuremberg war crimes trial against I.G. Farben, which took place between 1947 and 1948. There were 13 trials at Nuremberg, and the trial against Farben was the 6th one. But it was almost certainly the most important one. The significance, though, of the Nazis' intended war aims here involves this man, Fritz Termeer. Because he was found, he was a senior director of Farben, and he was found guilty at Nuremberg of plunder, spoliation, and his counsel, his legal counsel, specifically stated that the concept of a total European economic area had shaped his client's, meaning Termeer, his client's aims. So what he was essentially saying was it was an attempt to defend Termeer against the prosecution by saying that, well, yes, but his goal was honourable. It was a goal for a total European economic area. It was a very flimsy, weak attempt at defence. But what it tells us is that the concept of a Europe described in Salter's book was no accident. It confirms that the aims of Termeer and Farben were to bring about the creation of this economic Europe rather than a Europe for the people. Termeer was responsible for some of the most despicable crimes imaginable. He was responsible for the construction and operation of the I.G. Farben factory at the Auschwitz concentration camp. He was found guilty of plunder, spoliation, slavery, and mass murder, and he was condemned by the court to 7 years in prison. But despite the appalling, truly disgraceful, unimaginable nature of his crimes, he was released after only 2 years. And in 1956, despite knowing that he was a convicted war criminal, the drug company Bayer appointed him chairman of its supervisory board, a post he went on to hold for another 8 years. But there's a lot more. The evidence of the Nazi roots, the Nazi origins in the EU, go much further, because there are things that the Brussels EU does not want you to know about its first president. This man here, Walter Hallstein, was the first founding president of the European Commission. Because before and during World War II, Hallstein was a member of official Nazi organizations. One of them, the Association of National Socialist German Lawyers, was founded in 1933, immediately after the Nazis had assumed power. 3 years later, in 1936, it was converted to the notorious Nazi Association of Law Protectors. Now, membership of this organization was restricted to those people showing uncompromising support for, and participation in the Nazi ideals. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Hallstein was a member of both of these organizations. We know this from a memorandum sent by Hallstein to the representative of the Nazi government at the University of Rostock in Germany in 1935. You can see a copy of this and a translation in English on the right. But there's more. It wasn't just his membership of Nazi organizations that we can hold against Hallstein. We know a great deal about his personal ideology, and we know this from a speech that we refer to as his conquest speech, because the concepts and the aims described in this speech fit completely with the aims of the Nazi war machine and the creation of the Europe that we're talking about tonight. And the content of this speech, which I'll summarize briefly now, I promise you will change your perspective on the Brussels EU forever. A key aspect of this speech concerned what Hallstein misleadingly described as the link-up of Austria and large parts of what was then known as Czechoslovakia with Germany. Because rather than referring to these territories as having been invaded and conquered, taken by force, murderous force, he described their seizing as being part of, and I quote, the creation of the greater German Reich and the legal Germanization of the new territories. And he specifically said that the failure to create a unified legal system, now we know what that means, for Greater Germany was one of the unfinished tasks and failures of the Second German Reich. So that's the period in history at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century that led to the First World War. He also described the legal process for the creation of this unified legal system as being the issuing of directives. Further proof, in other words, that the concepts described in Scholter's book were real. And revealingly, given that the rise, as I mentioned a few moments ago, the rise of the Nazis and the preparations for World War II had been financed by I.G. Farben, he described the creation of the Greater German Reich as being an economic event of sheer unimaginable consequences, which ties in again with what Tamir said, or his attorney said, at Nuremberg. But an economic event of sheer unimaginable consequences. Well, he was right about the second part, the part that the consequences were sheer and unimaginable. But the first, as I say, tying in as it does with the evidence from Tamir's attorney, given under oath at Nuremberg, tells us a lot. But the most shocking part, perhaps, of what Hallstein said in this speech was that one of the most important laws to be introduced in the annexed countries, the invaded countries, was the law for the protection of the German blood and the German honor. In other words, Hallstein was advocating the imposition of the Nuremberg racial laws as the highest priority. The Nuremberg racial laws, of course, excluded German Jews from Reich citizenship and prohibited them from marrying or having sexual relations with persons of German or related blood.